30 constructions of a past advanced civilization. Afghanistan, Takht-e-Rostam Stupa. This structure, resembling an ancient bunker, is located in Afghanistan 3 kilometers from the city of Samangan. It is considered a Buddhist stupa, a monastery built approximately in the 3rd–4th century AD when Buddhists reached these lands. This gigantic domed hemisphere, carved directly in the limestone rock, reminds me of the so-called churches in Ethiopia. As in Ethiopia, the base of the stupa can be reached through a passage below. What's interesting, however, is that there is no direct entrance into the stupa itself. It is either solid inside, or any entrance would have to be from underground. Visually, the structure resembles a giant PVC pipe stopper or, say, the top of the bell. In the surrounding rock formations, there are roughly carved caves. But one of them is made with much higher precision and features a domed ceiling. The element in the form of a superstructure on top of the stupa is called harmika. Here, the harmika is one solid piece with the hemisphere, meaning the builders had to remove the entire mass of rock above the structure. Quite an impressive scale of work. According to legend, each stupa contained a relic, a part of Buddha's body or an item belonging to him. However, there is an opinion that this structure was created before the arrival of Buddhism in the area. In essence, it differs significantly from traditional stupas and was unlikely to serve the same purpose. Its current name actually means Throne of Rustam, after the Persian king who ruled here in the 7th century AD. Legend says he built this throne in half a day. Sure, and he also had a 3-meter-long pin. Now seriously, take a look at this photo. I don't know about you, but I'm almost certain that this doorway was not part of the original design. Just look at the 2 symmetrical sections with their high-quality craftsmanship, and then at this awkward, crude hole cut in the wall. It's obvious that someone was simply trying to find treasure inside a completely sealed structure. And it's quite possible they actually did. Traces of vandalism from different eras can be seen in many places here. For example, right here, someone tried to break into the main structure, but as we can see, without success. Nearby, there is also a platform made of large blocks, clearly part of something much bigger. These blocks were once fastened together with metal clamps, a construction method we've seen in many megalithic sites. It is believed that this was the tomb of King Cambyses II, who ruled Persia from 530 to 522 BC. Something tells me the stupa was built around the same period, if not even earlier. Speaking of Afghanistan, one cannot fail to mention the enormous Buddha statues, 38 and 55 meters tall, carved directly into the rock. The Bamiyan Buddhas were declared pagan idols and blown up by the Taliban in 2001. Officially, they are said to have been built in the 6th century AD, but carbon dating of the wood stuck in the rock showed a date of 570 BC, a difference of more than 1,000 years. Interesting, indeed. But we won't dwell on them for too long, as they were carved in very soft rock and clearly by Buddhist artisans. Gunung Kawi, Indonesia. On Bali, there are many remarkable temple structures with a unique architectural style. However, I suspect that many of them have been decorated and restored over the past few decades, and it's nearly impossible to find old photos of these temples. One thing I have no doubt about is that the oldest of the so-called Gunung Kawi temples has remained almost unchanged. The reason is simple. It is a mystical settlement carved entirely out of solid rock. Right at the entrance, we can see a perfectly cut trench in the rock. Why carve such a channel when simple steps over the top would have sufficed? Doesn't this look familiar? This was done only because it was easy if you had the right tools. Next, we have 4 huge mysterious monuments on one side and another 5 of the same kind on the other. All of them remain a single piece with the rock itself. The entire complex shows no sign of Hindu or any other deities. What kind of temples have no identifying religious symbols? An incredible amount of rock was removed to create the courtyards and these sculptures, yet the purpose remains unclear. Here we have a beautifully carved niche in the rock with a vertical cut about 4 meters high that looks as if it was made by a circular saw. And finally, there are dozens of such intriguing structures here. The feeling is almost like stumbling upon a hobbit settlement. For the last few centuries, these caves have been used for meditation. But what they were originally intended for is a far more intriguing question. When I look at these structures, I can't shake the feeling they remind me of something. Maybe you have ideas about what they could have been. Let me know in the comments. And we're moving on. The giant Olmec heads. 17 mysterious giant heads, carved from solid basalt, have been discovered in various locations across Mesoamerica. It's almost the only surviving trace of the Olmec civilization, which existed in what is now Mexico long before the Maya and the Aztecs. Researcher Graham Hancock has found evidence suggesting that it was the Olmecs who invented the famous calendar, later refined by the Maya. The first head was discovered completely by accident in Tres Zapotes in the mid-19th century. It stands 1.5 meters tall and weighs 9 tons. The largest head was found in the La Cobata region, where the basalt quarries used by the Olmecs are located. This statue stands 3.5 meters tall, weighs 40 tons, and is the only Olmec head with closed eyes. Here you can see all 17 authentic statues found in the region. Notice how each one has unique facial features. You can even read the emotions in their expressions. It is believed these were stylized portraits of different Olmec rulers. Disclaimer: you can also find fakes online. But many people who have heard about the Olmec heads may not know about the massive Olmec altars, also carved from monolithic basalt. Some of them are even heavier than the heads. Researchers claim these were thrones for rulers, as similar depictions have been found in caves in the region. By the way, it turned out that several of the discovered heads were originally altars, which were later recarved into heads. Many people point out that the heads supposedly have negroid facial features. However, this is nothing more than speculation, since such features are quite common among the local peoples. Nevertheless, there are proponents of Asian and even Australian origin theories. Whether this is fantasy or reality, time will tell. It is worth noting that the creation of giant statues, especially heads, was a characteristic trend among the ancient peoples of Central America and Polynesia. The Moai of Easter Island, the wooden statues of Hawaii, and the Olmec heads all share this trait. There is clearly more than just a territorial link between them. Japan, Yonaguni. In 1986, near Yonaguni Island, a diver discovered a mysterious structure on the ocean floor. What we see here is a massive rock formation that appears as if it was carved by machines. Enormous, even terraces, and steps tens of meters high, with sharp edges and protrusions. Could nature really have created this without human assistance? Japanese marine geologist Masaaki Kimura claims that the formations are artificial stepped monoliths, although many other scientists disagree. The debate continues to this day. Two enormous twin blocks help dispel some doubts. Professor Kimura states that they are limestone blocks, and limestone doesn't naturally cracks along such straight lines and contours. But what convinced me personally is the presence of a sort of basin at the top of this gigantic structure. Surely, no natural process could leave such protruding sections of rock intact in the middle while the surrounding stone remains solid. This aspect of Yonaguni reminds me somewhat of Sigiriya. Additionally, huge cylindrical pits have been found on top of the formation. If you are still not convinced, here is an absolutely straight channel running the entire length of one of the terraces. as if someone had made a guide cut before separating a large monolith. Many alternative researchers see temples here, an ancient city, or even Atlantis. Personally, I believe this was an ancient quarry, where stone blocks of the required shape were cut. Yes, it doesn't look entirely traditional, but it still preserves a stepped structure, similar, for example, to the quarry near Sacsayhuaman. If it truly was a quarry, that would mean stones were extracted here more than 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were much lower. Try fitting that into the official history. It becomes clear why scientists prefer not to pursue this theory. Fortunately, we are not scientists and we can afford that freedom of thought. India. India is home to an incredible number of traces of an ancient civilization that few people talk about. Let's take a look at the most astonishing of them. First, near the city of Magdumpur, there are 7 unique caves, 4 carved in the Barbar Hills and 3 others located nearby in the Nagarjuni rock formations. Now, take a look at the appearance and the quality of the polishing. This monk looks as if he is stepping into a spaceship or a skyscraper elevator. The hard gneiss rock has been polished quite literally to a mirror finish, and gneiss is even harder than granite. The unusual shape of the caves is also striking. When scientists examined them with a 3D scanner, they were simply astonished. The caves are designed with incredible geometric precision. Just look at the presentations and reports. And all of this is dated to around 250 before current era. It is believed that they were commissioned by Ashoka, the leader of the Maurya Empire and the disciple of the Buddha's disciple. Some of the caves were left unfinished, but this actually allows us to see vertical tool marks with a stroke length of over a meter, a clear indication that they were not carved manually with a pickaxe. The cave that impressed me the most, and which I have added to my personal must-visit list, is the Gopika cave in the Nagarjuni rock formation. Unlike the other caves, it has rounded walls and was most likely completed. Every surface, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor is perfectly finished. The workmanship here is unreal, even by modern standards. I have a strong suspicion that Kashyapa and later local rulers merely discovered these caves and left their inscriptions inside. Naturally, such caves have unusual acoustic properties. To these days, scientists cannot understand why the ancient Indians would create such perfectly engineered caves over 300 years BCE. An important point worth noting: here, once again, we encounter the familiar traces of a strange machine as if it rolled over softened stone, exactly like in Sigiriya. This time, however, the marks give us a little more information. There are actually 2 distinct types of imprints within the same track. Moving on, Rani Ki Vav is the largest and most beautiful stepwell on earth. It is located on the banks of the Saraswati River in the city of Patan. It remained buried underground for many years and was only discovered and excavated in the 1940s. But this is not just a well, as many believe. You will be surprised, but if you look at a typical Hindu temple, you will understand that Rani Ki Vav is an inverted temple, as if Hindu temple was turned inside out, as above, so below. For clarity, on top, the ancient Hindu temple of Brihadisvara, below a miniature model of Rani Ki Vav well flipped upside down. We know examples of techniques used by ancient Indian masters where temples were carved from top to bottom in the rock. As we can see, for the ancient builders, it was not difficult to perform such complex manipulations with their projects, as if the blueprints were inverted with a single keystroke. The amount of stone used here is simply countless, and we must not forget that the builders also had to somehow deal with the water seeping through the soil at such depth. There are also more than 1,500 sculptures here of quite a high level of complexity. It is impossible not to notice the size of the so-called deities compared to ordinary people, which is a separate mystery of Indian mythology. Everything indicates that this stepwell was built during the peak period of the ancient Indian civilization's development. The only question remaining is when exactly that was. Although it is dated to 1043 AD, in terms of the complexity of the work and appearance, it is practically no different from the Kailasa temple, which was built before the Common Era. Just think about it. Someone planned this massive construction, dug a pit by removing approximately 65,000 tons of earth, and then built this grand, multi-tiered structure, decorating it with more than 1,500 exquisite statues of Hindu deities. Another stepwell in India that amazes with its grandeur is Chandbauri. Its depth is almost 30 meters. It has 3,500 steps and 13 levels. However, I believe that originally it looked somewhat different from how it appears today. We will talk about it in the second part of my film about India. Although I simply must show you the temples of Hoysaleshvara and Amruteshvara. What makes them so unique? Well, this. I don't even see the point in trying to convince you otherwise. This is the Amruteshvara temple. Anyone familiar with a lathe will immediately understand. It reminds me of shop class lesson when I carved a wooden candlestick on a lathe. But here we're not talking about a small wooden candlestick, but 10-ton basalt columns that were spun at tremendous speed, clearly not with the help of elephants. Some might say this is a geopolymer concrete. You're free to think so, but in this case I don't even intend to argue otherwise. It's obvious. The columns are machined and polished with inhuman precision. Just look at it. The polishing quality is so high that in some places you can see your reflections as if in a mirror. But here is the good news. Most scientists actually agree that this was done on a lathe. However, no one yet been able to explain where the ancient Indian civilization got such technology. The Hoysaleshvara temple, located relatively nearby, was clearly made by the same builders. The talc chloride carvings look as if they were cast from metal. The holes in the ornamentation are so thin and carved that not even a needle can fit through, only something very thin and flexible, like a straw or very fine wire. If you tap on the basalt items, they produce a specific metallic sound, which means these pieces were made from basalt of various density. This only possible with the use of stone casting technology, which our civilization only discovered in the early 20th century. According to the official version, all bas-reliefs in this temple, which looks like something alien, were made by hand carving. Even if this not carving by casting, the complexity of the designs and ornamentation is no less fantastic. After all, making molds for casting such items is even more difficult task. The four-armed deities in the bas-reliefs of ancient India often hold suspiciously curious tools. I will not even start on their size. These temples provide clear evidence that there was once a civilization in India that was at least several hundred years ahead of ours in development. Angkor City, Cambodia. It is called the eighth wonder of the world. To this day, it remains the largest religious structure on planet Earth. Its total area is about 3 square kilometers, equal to 3 Vaticans. This complex was built with incredible geometric and astronomical precision, using construction technology that only became known to our civilization in the 19th century. The drainage canal system surrounding the city is simply astonishing. Excluding the stone used to create the canals, the amount of stone used for the construction of the temple complex is roughly equal to 10 million tons. And the nearest quarry is 80 kilometers from Angkor. Angkor is simply a gigantic area covered with temples. There are more than 70 temples here. The main and most famous ones are Bayon, Angkor Wat and Bapun. Most photos on the internet poorly illustrate the real scale of the buildings. Only when compared to a human does the true gigantism of these structures become clear. The central tower of Angkor Wat is 65 meters high, equal to a 20-story building. On the day of the spring equinox, the sun rises exactly along the axis of this tower if you stand facing the temple entrance. This is precisely what crowds of tourists come here to witness on those days. Bayon, or the Temple of 1,000 Faces, has 54 towers, each carved with 4 giant faces. In total, there are 216 faces, most likely of the god Vishnu, though this is not certain. The temples are simply covered with intricate bas-reliefs carved wherever possible, as if for the builders it was no more difficult than wallpapering. Just take a look at this craftsmanship. This wall, 350 meters long and 3 meters high, is entirely covered in stone carvings. On it, a depiction of the Gomfather, a 4-tusked elephant said to have gone extinct millions of years ago, was found. In another place, there is an image of Surya, a manifestation of the sun, along with 9 people symbolizing the 9 planets of the solar system, 2 of which, Neptune and Pluto, I remind you, were only discovered by our civilization in 1846 and 1930. But apart from the bas-reliefs, there are many other astonishing things here. Mysterious stone blinds of unknown purpose, clearly carved on a lathe and produced on an industrial scale. There are also columns of remarkable quality that were obviously not made with hand tools. Here is a perfectly shaped block left unused, and the so-called lingams, there are lots of them, and they clearly had some kind of technological function. It is quite possible that the temple was not a temple at all, but served another purpose. Not hinting to anything, although actually yes, hinting. In my next video, we will explore Angkor in more detail, dig into its history and try to get closer to its mysteries. The Yangshan Quarry. Just 15 kilometers from Nanjing, the ancient capital of China, lies the Yangshan Quarry. Inside it, there are 3 almost finished megaliths. The smallest megalith, the head, weighs 6,000 tons. It has enormous knobs, resemble those found on stones in Peru and Egypt. The second megalith, the body, weighs 9,000 tons and is the longest megalith in the world. If placed vertically, it would be taller than the Statue of Liberty. And the largest megalith, the base, weighs about 16,000 tons. It is 30 meters long, 16 meters high and 13 meters thick. It is 10 times larger than the heaviest block from the Baalbek quarry. According to the official version, Emperor Yongle, who ruled China in the 15th century, ordered the carving of a giant stele to honor his deceased father. And these 3 megaliths were supposed to become the constituent parts of this stele. And here again we hear the familiar version, that the builders simply overestimated their capabilities and in the process of working realized they couldn't transport such enormous stones. In my opinion, attributing the construction to Emperor Yongle doesn't sound very convincing. Yes, there are certain records about it, but just looking at the appearance of the quarry and the size of the blocks provides plenty of arguments against this version. Now I would like to talk about these arguments in more detail. Let's look at the quarry walls. Why would anyone need to level them? Doing so deliberately makes no sense. First, it's a waste of time. Second, it makes working in the quarry far more dangerous, making further excavation nearly impossible. A worker falling from such a height would almost certainly die, and even a fist-sized stone falling from above could be fatal. In other words, it goes completely against common sense. In both ancient and modern quarries, the step-cut method is used. It is safer and more practical, allowing blocks to be transported, equipment to be installed, and protecting against rockfalls. A more logical explanation, in my opinion, is that the quarry walls were leveled as a result of cutting out other similarly massive blocks. Take a look at these areas. We can roughly estimate that from the lower part of the quarry alone, they could have extracted 12 blocks of the same size of the world's largest megalith, the base. And from the entire quarry, they might have extracted up to 30 such blocks. In short, the huge rock was simply cut into sections and transported somewhere. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly where these boulders were taken or how they were used. Perhaps these discoveries still lie ahead of us. However, there is something puzzling. There are clear traces of hand-tool pickaxe work of ordinary size, with no suspicious marks from machinery as we see in other ancient sites around the world. And here is the problem. On one hand, we have hand-tool marks, on the other, we have colossal block sizes, a scale of work beyond human capability, and a unique, illogical approach to quarrying. Let's be honest, you are not moving such stones with elephants on logs. Two versions come to mind. The combined use of manual human labor together with advanced high-tech machinery. Or the pickaxe marks were left relatively recently to make the site fit the official historical narrative and raise fewer questions. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, but doing this, say 50 years ago, would have been very easy. We have a perfect example with the modern ancient frescoes in the Longyou caves. I wouldn't be surprised if the pickaxe marks in this quarry were made just 10 years ago. I wonder why the top surface of these blocks needed to be leveled. My guess is that once a block was completely detached from the rock on all sides, it would drop down onto these rectangular supports. This way, for further transportation, it wouldn't need to be lifted off the ground. For example, cables could be threaded through these openings, and the block could then be transported away by some sort of flying vehicle. Share your own theory in the comments about what might have been happening in the Yangshan quarry. But please, no ideas about geopolymer concrete here. By the way, I recently came across another interesting site in China, but we will return to it in another video. The Longyou caves were discovered in China only in 1992. They hadn't been found earlier because from ground level they look like this, all of them were flooded with water. A local farmer caught a big fish here and decided to pump out the water from the pond, hoping to catch more fish or find something interesting. So far, 45 caves have been found, and 36 of them have been drained. The caves are truly enormous, with ceilings up to 30 meters high. They vary in size, but all share a similar design. The area of an average cave is about 1 square kilometer. In creating these caves, the ancient builders removed nearly 1 million tons of stone, almost half the volume of stone used in the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The style of stonework inside the caves has no parallels anywhere in the world and resembles machine-cut marks found in salt mines. Here you can see columns like this and uneven step-like slopes. All the caves are precisely designed and have flooded rectangular chambers at the bottom. Even in the drained caves, these lower rooms remain underwater to this day. These drawings you see were made quite recently to attract tourists. Essentially, it can be considered vandalism. Inside the caves there are no traces of soot from torches, no gas lamp residue, no signs of human habitation and no signs of wear from use. There are many theories about the purpose of the Longyou caves, but I will focus on the most plausible one. According to it, the caves combine the functions of a well and a cistern for water storage. The caves are located near a river, and their rectangular chambers at the bottom extend into the underground aquifer. This is why, even after pumping, there is always water inside. Today, many of the caves remain flooded, and in the dry ones, water has to be pumped out periodically. This is what medieval rainwater cisterns look like in Istanbul, Paris and Copenhagen. The Longyou cisterns, however, also serve as wells. Moreover, the sloped floors allow debris to settle in one place. Judging by the number and size of the wells, the ancient builders likely used them for industrial purposes. Amusingly, the mystery of the Lonyu Caves function has been right in front of us all along. The caves still perform their intended role perfectly, thousands of years later. I'd like to thank Tina from the Curious Being channel for uncovering the purpose of the Lonyu Caves. She is the one who researched and proposed this theory. Be sure to subscribe to her channel. Sigiriya. What if I told you that in Sri Lanka there is a 170-meter granite rock cut across and along with some kind of mysterious equipment, showing traces of stone melting, as well as 3-meter granite monuments shaped like dinosaur claws? The only thing missing here is a pyramid. Oh wait, there is one too, although half destroyed. Officially, this fortress is dated to the 4th century AD, and authorship is attributed to King Kashyapa. But to the naked eye, it is clear that two civilizations separated by thousands of years left their marks here. At the top we find astonishing examples of mysterious stoneworking technologies resembling stone casting. Here we see a rock with its top cut off, a parallelepiped 6 by 6 meters carved into it, and something like a stone coach, which may also have served as a mount for artillery or some kind of technical device. Practically everywhere these creations are one with the bedrock itself. In this photo you can see how much older structure of unknown purpose is enclosed by massive brickwork. Of course, the pools carved directly into the rock draw attention. The largest is 27 by 20 meters and 2 meters deep. Over 3,000 tons of granite were extracted just from this basin. On the summit of the rock lies a colossal granite block weighing 2,000 tons, set up on supports. It is clearly part of the rock that may have broken off accidentally. Guides claim that it was placed on the supports for defensive purposes, so it could be pushed down onto attackers. Sounds plausible. The main question remains: how could they possibly lift such a block to such a height? But the most fascinating part is found halfway up to the summit. Just take a look at the sheer size and detail of this massive claws carved from solid granite. These are the so-called Lion's Gate. It is said that the lion once had a head and the path to the fortress led right through its mouth. But eventually the head fell off and disappeared. Now let's take a closer look at the lion's claws and compare them with real lion anatomy. Something doesn't quite add up. A lion has 5 toes, all of almost equal size, with the big toe on the inner side, just like a human thumb. Here, however, we see only 4, 3 large ones and a rudimentary 4th on the outer side. The funny part is that the site's current name, Sigiriya, literally means lion rock. This is a prime example of people not bothering too much with facts. They clearly drew an analogy with the Sphinx in Egypt and decided not to overthink it. A giant animal monument must mean a lion, and so to this day these claws are called the Lion's Gate and Sigiriya is referred to the Lion Rock. But whose claws are they really? Local reptiles such as lizards, crocodiles and chameleons also have 5 toes. A closer match would be the talons of predatory birds, for example owls. We can also look at depictions of the mythical griffin, whose claws were often portrayed in various forms. Yet the closest resemblance is arguably to the claws of an ancient reptile, like the Tyrannosaurus rex, though even there the small toe is positioned differently. Things are getting even more intriguing. It is also important to consider the myth of this land. The infamous Ravana, a demon from Hindu mythology, is said to have been an ancient ruler of Sri Lanka. Perhaps the builders were trying to depict him in the form of a mythical beast thousands of years ago. Or they simply chose to represent the most terrifying predator known in those times. Write your guesses in the comments. Whose claws do you think they are? The plateau itself is literally covered with a variety of traces, from rectangular ones resembling bulldozer tracks to mysterious lines carved in the most inaccessible spots by an unknown method. Another mystery: what did the original steps look like, and how exactly and why was such a massive amount of brickwork hauled up here all the way to a height of 200 meters? A staggering 3 million bricks and 3,000 marble steps were dragged up, brought from who knows where. Today you can climb the rock using a metal staircase, but what kind of ascent existed in the past remains a mystery. I think the Sigiriya fortress is one of the best examples of a structure that clearly shows the overlay of two distinct eras of builders. The more ancient ones built the megaliths, cut into the rocks, and used stone casting techniques. They may have even seen dinosaurs. The later builders, around the 5th century under King Kashyapa, were skilled with bricks and transported them here in massive quantities. They are also the ones, apparently, who built the pyramid at the top. Whatever you say, the composition that resulted is truly fascinating, although I would love to see what the very first version of the structure looked like. Easter Island statues. Easter Island is the second most remote island in the world in terms of distance from large continents, 3.5 kilometers away. Today you can reach it by plane from San Diego in about 5 hours. What's astonishing is that the island even has its own authentic writing system, Rongo Rongo. Popular culture owes the concept of mana, spiritual force, inner energy, to the natives of this place. The island of Rapa Nui, as the locals call it, is world famous thanks to its plain filled with statues known as Tangarit. According to one theory, these are statues of the island's deceased chiefs. Few people know that there are about 8,090 statues on the island. All of them were made right there, from volcanic tuff carved out of the cliffs of an extinct volcano, located in the northeastern part of the island. Some stand alone, while many others lie abandoned face down on the ground. The platforms on which the statues were erected show clear signs that they could not have been created with simple stone tools. They are carved from solid rock, with evidence of polygonal masonry. In the quarry where the heads for the statues were made, researchers discovered ancient cuts that appear to have been made mechanically. The rock faces show perfectly straight cuts, as if sliced with machine tools, as well as impressions resembling melted stone that had been pressed with fingers, like clay. This suggests that the island was once the site of large-scale statue production. But the question remains, why were so many statues needed? Despite the clickbait titles on the internet claiming the mystery of Easter Island statues solved, I assure you that there is still no clear and rational answer to the question of who built the statues, how and for what purpose. Researchers conducted an experiment to show how, in theory, the natives could have moved the statues. But this explanation doesn't account for how they transported them down steep slopes, up rugged hills, or raised them onto platforms 3 meters high. Perhaps in the future we will learn the truth. It's all in our hands. The official dating of the statues places them in the 13th–14th centuries, though this is far from certain. At first, everyone thought the statues consisted only of heads, until in 2012 one was excavated, and it turned out that the head was only 3/8 of the entire statue. The average statue weighed about 50 tons. In the quarry lies the largest unfinished statue, which was meant to weigh 265 tons and stand 21 meters tall. All statues face inland towards the island, except for one group, Ahu Tangariki, which looks out towards the ocean. Locals claim these are the island's protectors. There is also one unique statue unlike the others. It appears to depict a kneeling man in prayer and is made from a different material. On the territory of modern-day Turkey, there are several complexes that can tell us many interesting things. One of them is Hattusa, once an enormous complex. Walking from one gate to another is a challenge in itself. Its territory holds a vast number of blocks with clear traces of mechanical processing. But what is truly astonishing is the complex of Alakahuyuk. Here we find polygonal masonry made of large, irregularly shaped blocks with millimeter-precise joints. All of this strongly resembles the stonework of Peru, which we will discuss later. Here we see massive blocks left from ancient structures lying among ruins. It gives the impression of complete destruction of some very ancient construction. In the ancient city of Cyzicus, in the west of Turkey, are the ruins of a megalithic temple. Here everything was smashed into pieces, as if after a series of powerful earthquakes or missile attacks. But one detail survived. This is the part of the largest column that has ever been created on planet Earth. To be precise, this is the largest capital, the decoration part that was usually at the top of the column. It is on the capital the ceiling rests. We can only imagine what height this column had. The diameter of the capital is 1.9 meters, the height is 2.5 meters. Many scholars agree that this temple was larger than the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek. We will talk about Hadrian's temple in one of the following videos. Now let's move on. Also Turkey, the Kapılıkaya tomb. Located 27 kilometers north of the city of Çorum, this mysterious structure is carved directly in the rock. Resembling either the dwelling of the Grinch or a gigantic doll man, Kapılıkaya, literally the rock with a door, is perhaps the most enigmatic ancient monument in present-day Turkey. In fact, it has a cubic shape. You can walk around it in a circle and its height is about 13 meters. At first glance, its size and the method of carving reminded me of the Yanshan quarry megaliths in China. At a height of 4.5 meters, there is an opening measuring 1 by 1 meter. Here is what you can see inside when flying a drone closer. We can see that the hole at the top had been attempted to be widened, clearly at the moment when someone was trying to pull something interesting out of there, but it couldn't fit through this opening. Apparently, locals had also tried to drill into the tomb from the back. But after digging in about 2 meters and finding nothing, they decided to abandon the idea. Above the entrance there is a Greek inscription Ikesios. Researchers believe this is the name of the ruler whose body was buried here, but this has not been proven. Possibly the word carries a completely different meaning. And the reason it was called a tomb was most likely due to the long-standing tradition of labeling everything ancient and unexplained as a tomb. From this angle, you can see that part of the rock was simply cut off. It looks as if they were trying to make a tunnel into the mountain, and that was 2000 years ago. Interestingly, the structure was never fully separated, another similarity with the Yanshan quarry, though for now this is just speculation. A group of similar structures can be found in the city of Amasya, 70 kilometers east of Çorum. All these constructions are called the tombs of the rulers of the Kingdom of Pontus, which existed from 281 to 64 BC. On the slopes of the neighboring mountains, stone quarrying was often carried out, and something similar still takes place today. In present-day Turkey, near the city of Miletus, lie the ruins of the ancient Greek sanctuary of Didymaon. The first mentions of it date back to the 8th century BC, at the time when the Egyptian kingdom was entering its decline. This is the largest temple of the ancient world, surpassing all Greek temples by 2.5 times. There is nothing of such scale in Greece itself. I would call it a second Baalbek. Here we see half-meter high steps, 20-meter columns with a 2-meter base, and massive 8-meter megaliths used in the foundation. There are also polygonal blocks of complex shapes, rounded and tapered at the same time, along with magnificent ceiling slabs with niches that looks as if lamps could have once been placed there. In terms of height, it is comparable to a 7-story building. Here lies one of the fallen columns, broken into sections. At the very center of the temple there is a passage leading underground, now blocked with stones, while the other entrances are closed to tourists for unknown reasons. The block goes down at least 5 layers. There is no doubt that the most important part was located underground. In Didymaon we see numerous traces of machine processing and evidence that the blocks seemed to have been created in a factory-like manner, following a template and then finally finished after being placed. The area around the perimeter is simply littered with remnants of the stones from which the structure was built, and some of them look very interesting. Really stunning. Here we find many images of Medusa Gorgon. These kinds of mysterious beings, as well as griffins. The ornament also features a swastika identical to the one in Baalbek. The entire Didymayon looks as if it were Baalbek, only made of marble. I have no doubt that both temples were created by the same builders. But who exactly those ancient builders were and when they built these structures is still to be discovered. Just like in Baalbek, there are inscriptions in Greek here, but could the Greeks really have built this? I have serious doubts. Either they simply claimed the place and left the inscriptions, or our understanding of the ancient Greeks is greatly distorted. What do you think? Write your opinion in the comments. Baalbek. The most epic ancient structure built of the largest blocks on Earth. Here in Lebanon there are the biggest stones ever used by man in construction. The so-called trilithons are 19 meters long, about 5 meters wide and 4 meters high. The weight of each stone is about 500 tons, and they were raised to a height of 7 meters. Trilithons are placed on a number of blocks that are only 1.5 times smaller, but are no less striking. And now the most interesting thing, in the quarry there are world record holders in size: Northern Stone, Southern Stone and 2 others under it. One of them is called the Forgotten Stone and is the largest processed stone in the world. Its weight is 1,670 tons. The length is 19.6 meters, the width is 6 meters, the height is 5.5 meters. All these stones are still connected to the rock with their bottom side. The blocks were probably meant to fill the trilithon-filled podium, because there is still free space for 10 of them to fill the podium. And the largest stone was intended for a layer on the trilithons. Then it would be a canonical Roman podium, though unprecedented in size. In this case, on the top layer it was necessary to put 14 blocks of 1,500 ton weight. By the way, there is a hypothesis that the Romans observed here the so-called Herodian style of masonry by ancient builders and then began to use it everywhere. Bacchus temple is the main attraction of Baalbek, but in fact it stands apart from the main structure. And the main temple here was the temple of Jupiter. If it wasn't ruined, then its grandeur would easily eclipse the temple of Bacchus. Among the ruins of Jupiter's temple, we see the largest survived ancient columns in the world, 19 meters high. It's the height of a 5-story house. If the temple had survived to this day, it would have made the Parthenon in Athens look like a tiny cottage. We know for sure that the columns were brought from Egypt because they are made of syenite, which is only there. And these giants were elevated to a 7-meter platform of huge blocks, which stands on another platform with a huge tunnel inside. The writer and traveler Mark Twain wrote in his memoirs that a train could safely pass in these tunnels. And indeed, now there is a museum here, but of all its exhibits, the most impressive is the tunnel itself. But this is not all. The stairs in the opposite part of the complex are the same trilithons in the form of stairs. So there are 7 more of these blocks here. Nowhere in the world there are analogues of such a huge staircase carved from a solid piece of stone. Who did build this giant complex? Probably the craziest theory I've ever found. Baalbek was built in the 19th century. Why? I don't understand, maybe so we can make this kind of videos. There are also suggestions that the force of gravity used to be different, and even that the temple was built with the power of thought. There is also a bit less fantastic but beautiful version about giants. Here we have the ancient people of the Edids and the legend of Tsar Nimrod, who restored Baalbek after the flood with the help of titans. By the way, Nimrod is credited with the construction of the notorious Babylonian Tower. However, there is no scientific evidence to support the theory about giants. The processing marks on the stones indicate that the stones were handed by people of our height with pick, chisel and tooth chisel of normal size. Some claim that the blocks are made of concrete, which is simply contrary to the proven facts. These blocks are of solid limestone. Even if they were made out of concrete, it would be done right on the site, not in the quarry. The next version is much more interesting, because here we are dealing with certain facts and attempts to find evidence, as well as the presence of some scientists on its site. According to it, Baalbek was built by an ancient civilization that had the technology to carve, move and lay such stones with relatively little difficulty. And here is its main weakness. We have a giant construction, but no tools, no infrastructure for its creation, and no factories were found. And this fact drives all the open-minded alternative history supporters into a narrow tunnel of version according to which a highly advanced civilization came from another planet and after finishing the work they took all their gears and tools with them. Let's just say they finished the project and flew back to Orion. Only then it all makes sense. Let's now take a look at official history version. The city of Baalbek was first mentioned in Amarna letters, dating back to the 14th century BC. In ancient times, there was a Phoenician temple dedicated to Baal god. We don't know how it looked. By the way, since ancient times, in these lands, Baal was one of the main gods who was worshipped and recognized. But with the change of the epoch and the modification of religions, this god was demonized, and now you can easily find his name in the list of demonic beings. It all seems like changing one political regime to another. Historians say the process of construction has repeatedly stopped and took more than 2 centuries. All the researchers agree on one thing: the temple whose ruins we see has never been completed. Over the years, the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Arabs, Greeks and Romans have lived here. In the Middle Ages, Baalbek was often used as a fortification where battles were often fought. For many years it was subjected to iconoclasm by Christians and Muslims. It is known that at the end of the 1st century BC there was a province of the Roman Empire, Judea, whose ruler was Herod the Great, who went down in history not only as a cruel king, but also as a great builder. He is credited with the construction of the main buildings. There is also written confirmation that Herod was actively funding construction projects in the Roman territories in order to consolidate his power. Experts are also convinced that Herod also carried out the construction of the second Jerusalem temple. Jerusalem and Baalbek have the same block sizes, average row heights and Herodian style of masonry, with layers of small blocks alternating with layers of large blocks. The resemblance is undeniable. It is believed that the inner platform was built at the end of the 1st century BC, the second in the end of the 1st century AD, the temple of Bacchus was built in the 2nd century, and the temple of Venus was built even later and preserved worst. The drawing of the pediment of Jupiter temple seems really interesting. It was found on the top of one of those trilithons. The drawing covers the entire top of the block and is partially hidden under the blocks laid on top of it. It looks like the builders executed it so close to the construction to check if they were building it right. So the blocks over the trilithons were set at the same time as the temple of Jupiter, and on the top of the upper drum of one of the columns of Jupiter temple found inscriptions in Greek indicating the year, which according to our chronicles is considered 60th year AD. If this inscription was made during construction, it is the construction date, but there are still many questions with no answers. For example, how did the builders know that the rock goes to sufficient depth and that they would be able to extract such a solid block 5.5 meters high? If you know the answer to this question, write in the comments. Why Baalbek, unlike most ancient buildings, including Roman ones, doesn't have a clear orientation on the sides of the world? How and why such perfect joints were made? Even supporters of the official version find it difficult to understand how such huge blocks were placed on each other, tossed and turned to fit the gaps and eliminate irregularities between 2 blocks. What are these circular traces that look like disc cutter marks? Pay attention to this one-piece block. It means that this corridor was made sloping after its creation. How and why? The complex has a very mysterious through-and-through traces of destruction. A huge part of the collapsed wall and clearly opposite it exactly the same damage in another wall which was carelessly tried to restore. And then there is this block that's either cracked or it's been punctured by something, so that they had to align the hole and put in it small blocks. It could be the effect of the earthquake which repeatedly damaged the complex, or maybe they are traces of something much more interesting. Have you seen what the Bacchus temple looked like a century ago? For some reason few people pay attention to these photos, but they are quite interesting. By the way, there are people who are convinced that inside this column is a metal rod that was hidden from us by covering it with a solution. What do you think? In fact, to cut such a megalith by hand, although it is very time-consuming and inconvenient, but it is quite real, given that limestone is far from the hardest rock. It is believed that Roman subjects cut down megaliths manually and used to transport winches and a large number of people. Blocks were dragged along a special 800 meters long embankment from the quarry to the complex. I want to remind that the quarry is only 1 degree lower than the temple, which at least eliminates the need to drag up. History has shown examples of transporting very large stones at different times. Obelisk of Thutmose III weighed 280 tons, had been moved from Karnak to Constantinople in 4th century AD. Mussolini obelisk weighing 300 tons was dragged 11 kilometers to the harbor on wooden rollers. Thunderstone weighing 1,500 tons in 1769 was transferred on 8 kilometers and on ships transported to St. Petersburg. However, in the case of Thunderstone, it was a national event, well covered in the press. During transportations, excesses arose which almost stopped the whole process. It's only one stone, and this is 1769, and we are talking at least 1,700 years before that, and dozens of stones. Jean-Pierre Adam calculated that it would take 120 people and 6 winches, which were available to the Romans at that time, to move 800-ton stone to the site of construction on wooden rollers by a good Roman road. But the question remains, will the logs hold such weight? Why did they build such huge megalithic buildings in Baalbek and Jerusalem, but not in Rome? Perhaps because there are large deposits of good, fairly durable limestone without cracks and irregularities. So they didn't have to drag the stones out of nowhere, ship them out to sea, etc. Because the quarry is 800 meters from Baalbek, the same goes for Jerusalem. And in Rome, the main building material was travertine and tuff, which is simply not suitable for megalithic construction. Let's sum up. Huge 1,000-ton blocks were cut down from the quarry in large numbers. They were moved 800 meters to the complex, and there, with cavalry accuracy, were stacked on each other and processed. There are also several incredible temples with huge columns. So far, no experiments have been carried out with similar 800-ton blocks in similar conditions, so that it is possible to say with certainty that this was exactly done by the Romans or other people of those times. Our knowledge of Roman technology, of the practices of moving huge stones in other regions, and theoretical calculations of researchers make it possible to say that it was possible to do without super technology. But given the scale, it would require a lot of manpower, a lot of willpower, and an incredible amount of time and effort. Living in modern cities, it's hard to imagine how people could have put such an unreal amount of effort in the construction. Perhaps they were slaves and were building this complex for some king. But it's not worth completely dismissing the theory that part of the complex was built much earlier, by representatives of civilization, information of which has reached us only in the form of legends. Personally, I believe that benefit of an alternative version is that its adherents raise uncomfortable questions and awaken a new interest in ancient buildings and a deeper study of their origins. Write in the comments which version you are committed to. Maybe you have an opinion which was not mentioned in this video. In Ethiopia, in the city of Lalibela, there are 11 mysterious structures carved one piece in a rock. They are believed to be Christian churches, founded in the 12th century. Some people even call this place the Second Jerusalem.
They all were carved from the top down into red volcanic tuff rock. The main structure is now called the Church of St. George. According to legend, King Lalibela, who once visited Jerusalem, had a mystical experience during his pilgrimage and saw heavenly Jerusalem. After this, he decided to build his own Jerusalem in his homeland, supposedly around the year 1180. The church complex is said to symbolize both the heavenly and earthly Jerusalems, while this trench represents the Jordan River. You got the idea. It's one of those analogies like saying, if pigs could fly. Heavenly Jerusalem, what are you talking about? I found a website with 3D models of these churches, and what I saw really surprised me. This is how the church looks from the outside, and this is its interior. And this is the view from below. Here is another church, and another one. Now we are like inside this stone structure. But this specific camera view helps us understand what complex shapes have been hollowed out from inside these buildings. I wonder what technology allowed them to do this. There are more questions than answers. But the interesting part is just beginning. This is what the Lalibela cross looks like. A rather traditional cross with a familiar elongated lower arm. However, not a single one of these crosses can be found in the rock-hewn churches. These are all the symbols that can be seen here. I want to draw your attention to swastika, which has been found in Baalbek, Didyma, ancient India, and dates back to ancient times. The first mentions go back 8,000 years. India is also relevant here because similar structures like the rock-hewn temples of Ellora carved from tough rock are located there. However, they were only discovered in the 8th century AD, and it's unknown how much earlier they were actually built. I also want to highlight these boss marks on the corners of windows and doors. Let's take a note of them as we will return to them later. We also know for certain that Ethiopia was one of the first countries to adopt Christianity in the year 330. Logically, it would make sense that the construction of this complex in 330 Ethiopia began around this time, as it would have been a significant political gesture. And King Lalibela in the 12th century most likely just rewrote history and took credits for its construction. Yes, one could also say that these crosses are associated with the Templars, who by the way did visit this place. But we also know that these symbols originate from much older cultures, such as ancient Egypt. Personally, I lean towards the idea that the Lalibela complex was built in the pre-Christian period. At the end of this video, I will explain why I think so. And we can't forget what seems to me to be an even older site, the Aksum complex. Here we see underground bunkers of unknown purpose, megaliths joined with metal clamps, fake doors, which now allow us to claim that trolls built this place. One of the structures even has a monolithic 300-ton slab covering an area of 100 square meters. Above ground, enormous obelisks made of blue syenite, a hard material not found in this region, are placed on special stone platforms. They were carved from a single piece of rock, or perhaps they were made using a stone casting or geopolymer concrete technique. Either way, the essence remains the same. The megaliths measure 21 meters, 24 meters, and 34.5 meters in height. The largest obelisk, however, has fallen and broken, weighing approximately 500 tons. Imagine a single block as tall as a 12-story building being crafted and somehow placed upright. And this was done before the 3rd century AD, since the erection of obelisks is clearly not a Christian tradition. For comparison, during the Italian occupation of Ethiopia, the Italians took one of the steles in 3 separate parts. When it was returned to Ethiopia, 3 Ruslan aircrafts were used along with high-tech construction equipment to reassemble the stele in its place, and this process took 3 years. But in Aksum, a monolithic stele 10 meters taller once stood. The ornamentation of the stele is worth special attention. Here we again see fake doors, patterns like this, and oh my god, the same cross as in Lalibela. Could this really be a coincidence? Now let's return to the boss marks I mentioned earlier. Here they are in Lalibela, and here they are on the Aksum obelisks. And the last thing I noticed by chance, this is a window in Lalibela church, and this is the top of an obelisk in Aksum. It seems we can insert one part into another. I think we now have enough evidence to conclude that the Lalibela church complex was built by the same people who built the Aksum structures, and Christians simply repurposed this place, turning it into a cargo cult without understanding its original purpose. Honestly, I think the paintings of Ethiopian Christians are some of the most amazing sacred paintings I have ever seen. Just look at these lovely frescoes.
Peru and Bolivia. The mighty walls of the citadel Ollantaytambo are capable of capturing anyone's curiosity. They are assembled from immense blocks which sometimes reach tens of tons, but are adjusted to each other with amazing accuracy, despite not only rectangular but also other bizarre forms. Even more spectacular are the blocks that form the lining of the central platform and reach about 4 meters in height. And all of this on the top of the winding terraces, which are difficult to reach even without extra loading. The architects used the logic of deviations from standards. There is no unification of blocks, they are all different sizes. This type of masonry gives significantly good seismic resistance. I hope you noticed that most of the masonry was indeed constructed by the Incas or even more recent restorers. However, the largest stones were clearly placed by someone who had advanced technology, perhaps even more advanced than we have today. The so-called tired stones lie on the way from the quarry to the complex, weighing 50 and even more tons. The Peruvian historian Garcilaso de la Vega described in his book Comentarios Reales de los Incas that one of the Inca leaders, wanting to strengthen his authority, gathered 20,000 men and ordered them to raise one of these tired stones up the mountain. The story ended tragically. A huge rock fell and thousands of Incas died. Even now, the local authorities cannot remove one of the tired stones blocking half of the road. The quality of processing ancient blocks is truly impressive. It's completely incompatible with what the Incas did. That's more in line with machine work. Polygonal masonry strikes with perfect joints and the absence of any stone solution. No less curious are the terraces of the Sexaeman complex, located 40 kilometers to the southwest. Its massive blocks spark endless debates and controversies about the technology used to create them. I will definitely make a video about this in the future. For now, I just want to show you the largest stone of Sexaeman and breathtaking aerial view of the complex. Isn't it impressive? In neighboring Bolivia, there is another mysterious complex, Pumapunku, featuring giant H-shaped blocks and other precise geometric shapes. It almost seems like part of a space station where some military equipment or computers could have been mounted onto these stone supports. In general, the region of Peru and Bolivia is an extraordinary place for all lovers of truly ancient structures. Looking at the graceful shapes of buildings, the perfect joints of blocks and the smooth shapes of the cutouts, you realize that there is no sense to talk about primitive technologies. It's more like rock-cutting advanced industry. Even many of the locals claim that most of the buildings in Peru were built by a civilization that existed 10,000 years ago. To make sure of it, it is only necessary to look at a giant megalithic gate or Sexaeman complex, Machu Picchu, storing examples of insane stone processing techniques. The stones and rocks here are cut in completely random directions. Complex Kenko and Kenko 2, which resembles a scientific base or radar station. A 12-corner stone, a double staircase, all this is simply incredible. It seems that such designs were molded as if from clay. Very high-tech tools, such as a circular saw blades, tools with fine diamond dust, water jet cutter, laser, and even technologies unknown to us today could have been used. Here we find an enormous number of traces of a highly advanced civilization, and this region undoubtedly deserves a separate video. By the way, the famous Nazca lines are also located nearby. At present, 1,300 lines and figures have been discovered, each thousands of years old. The logic and purpose behind creating such vast work remain a mystery to us. What we do know is that an unimaginable area of land was cleared of stones either by moving them or peeling them aside. Most of the drawings can only be seen from a considerable height. This means that for their creators, reaching such an altitude must not have been difficult. Many people have heard of Nazca, but did you know that peculiar geoglyphs have also been found on the Palpa Plateau, just 20 kilometers north of Nazca? The geoglyphs here are no less mysterious: lines, trapezoids, figures and drawings, a labyrinth and even an Indian mandala. It turns out we are dealing with an even larger scale of work, one whose meaning still escapes us to this day. Mexico. One translation of the name Teotihuacan is the place where the gods flew from. The ancient city of the gods is considered the jewel of Maya culture. However, real facts indicate that its first builders, many centuries before the Maya, were representatives of a highly advanced civilization. When the city was discovered, it was completely covered with soil. The pyramids have been restored multiple times, which is why today they are clad with ordinary small stones. But there are areas closed to tourists where the original blocks are stored, left aside during restoration, and they are truly mind-blowing. There is also a staircase that leads to nowhere. Many note that the arrangement of the three pyramids of Teotihuacan relative to one another strongly resembles the alignment of the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. This fact, among others, suggests that they may have had the same builders. The polygonal masonry here closely resembles that of Egypt, and the pyramid of Cholula even surpasses the Great Pyramid of Egypt in volume. Of course, we must also talk about Israel, where there are two places showing clear traces left by an ancient civilization. For example, the fortress of Nimrud. Under its walls you can find ruins of huge blocks coming in at almost 40 tons. A section of a spiral staircase carved from a single block, 8-meter-high ceilings. It is called the Fortress of Nimrud, who according to ancient legends was a giant and a builder of a fortress. It is not difficult to guess that the second place we will name is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The total brick volume of the Temple Mount corresponds to the volume of an average Egyptian pyramid. In the archaeological park, the wall around the Temple Mount consists of huge blocks with very high level of stone processing. Here you can find a block of 600 tons and a length of 12 meters, which was lifted up by layers of medium-sized blocks. The tunnel of the western wall, where excavations are still taking place, also deserves attention. Archaeologists have already descended several floors down, and the end of the masonry is still not visible. 40 meters down, 18 layers underground, and this megalith is still not alone here. No sane person now would think it possible to do without the help of heavy equipment. The stone processing style, size of the blocks, the general appearance of the masonry, the holes are almost identical with indicators in Baalbek, perhaps even built by the same architects. And I couldn't fail to mention the megaliths of Japan. This country is often associated with robots and futuristic cities. However, there is evidence that long before its well-documented history, an equally advanced civilization existed here. Take, for example, the so-called Ishibutai Kofun tomb. It was built from massive stone blocks weighing up to 100 tons each. It remains unknown why the builders needed to create a tomb with such enormous blocks, or how they managed to do it. It seems as if the ancient inhabitants of Japan had access to gigantic construction cranes. From the side, the so-called tomb resembles a hangar. Not far from it, deep in a dense forest, lies the massive granite boulder known as Masuda Iwafune. It stands 5 meters tall and weighs 800 tons. Its appearance is simply astounding. Scientists and historians are still struggling to determine its purpose. The prevailing theories are not particularly convincing, ranging from a stone boat to a pedestal for a monument to a Japanese public figure. Also, there are no documents regarding its construction. An analysis of the stone revealed significant traces of cobalt, a rare and highly durable metal that is now used in the production of high-end components for vehicles. But just look at this. Here is how a human looks in comparison to this huge stone. It was clearly meant to be moved somewhere, and it is definitely unfinished. What do you think it was supposed to be in the end? Another baffling stone is Ishina Hoden, which weighs 600 tons. Yes, it is made not of granite, but of tuff, which is much easier to work with. But just look at it. It was created by removing rock from around the stone, a process that involved excavating over 100 tons of material. The remaining block was shaped into a cube with a notch on one side. There are no visible chisel or pickaxe marks, nor any clear signs of machine processing. It looks bizarre. People call it the soaring stone, because from certain angles it appears to be levitating. In reality, it is still attached to the rock with its bottom, but water constantly pools underneath it. For comparison, just look at this building next to it. That's a two-story Shinto temple. Yes, they have taken over the area, hung bells and prohibited any research. Maybe that's a good thing. At least no one is restoring it or engraving inscriptions about Japanese emperors supposedly responsible for its construction. Scientists have twice attempted to study it with ultrasound, but the results were inconclusive. Many say that Ishino Hoden resembles a power line support structure. Also, in Japan is the so-called Devil's Chamber pot, officially known as Oni no Sechen. It is a massive granite lid weighing around 30 tons, which some refer to as an altar for black magic. And naturally, Egypt. Egypt has more than 100 pyramids, 7 of which are radically different from the rest in construction methods and technology. They stand out so sharply from the picture of a supposedly primitive ancient Egyptian society that they allow us to propose a version. These pyramids were built by a civilization that had reached a very high level of development. The pyramids were built with precision at the very limit of modern tools, an astonishing contrast. In Egypt, you can find an incredible amount of facts turning our view of history upside down. 100-ton sarcophagi confounding even modern-day technology when trying to reproduce them. Processed boulders with polished, curved surfaces, cutouts accurate, almost machine-level precision, cuttings with tubular drills and more. The number of stunning things is vast. The most striking example is the Red Pyramid, with its perfectly flat walls, corridors and chambers, as well as its massive masonry blocks. The Bent Pyramid, attributed to Snefru, demonstrates extraordinary construction quality. The Meidum Pyramid was built with large standardized blocks, and it is clearly visible that the blocks were leveled only after being laid. It is hard to believe that an inclined surface the size of a basketball court could have been leveled by hand. Inside the pyramid's tunnel are blocks with perfectly flat edges. The granite temple of Karnak is made of enormous blocks with workmanship that astonishes even today. The Khufu complex on the Giza Plateau consists of 100-ton blocks. The massive granite blocks of the Assyrian complex were laid with remarkable precision. According to inscriptions, this is the burial place of the god Osiris. The granite temple near the Sphinx was built from gigantic blocks that would astonish anyone. In the quarry, you can find the trail of a giant machine which cut off the granite wall, and also a giant obelisk which was left in the quarry carved from a single huge piece of granite rock. And finally, here in Egypt, there are the giant statues, colossi of Memnon. Thousands of tons of quartzite, one of the hardest natural materials. They require even harder tools than quartzite to work with them. Their weight exceeds the lifting capability of the most powerful modern cranes. Any modern sculptor would envy such craftsmanship. Do you think the obelisk of Aswan is the biggest stone in Egypt? Well, I'm going to surprise you. In the last 2 decades, as many as 4 previously unknown megaliths have been found, proportionate and even larger than the Aswan obelisk. I've already made a separate video about them on this channel, so you can check it out. For now, we will focus on the biggest one. This block is 22 meters long and 8 meters wide. This megalith is longer, wider and higher than the forgotten stone of Baalbek. Based on the size of the unfinished stone, researchers have calculated its weight to be around 2000 tons. But what's more interesting, on the top of the block is the scratch of a statue, another Egyptian colossus which was going to be carved from this stone. It would be the largest and most magnificent colossus of ancient Egypt, even larger than the colossi of Memnon. It is not clear how the builders were going to pull such a huge stone out of the quarry. But one thing is clear, It is unlikely that they would have started such a colossal work without having an answer to this question. In many places on the stone, inscriptions related to the construction have been found and identified as inscriptions of Ptolemaic Egyptians. It turns out that the Egyptians, in the period from the 4th to the 1st century BC, had the ability to carry blocks weighing up to 2000 tons. Or that dating is wrong and we are dealing with the work of more ancient builders. Mega Pit of El Arian, Egypt. Most people don't know that right next to the famous pyramids of Giza there is another remarkable structure, a gigantic shaft. Perhaps this is the most strange and mysterious sight of today's video. Some people believe that in this place we see, let's say, the lower part of the pyramid structure, on which they did not have time to complete the pyramid itself. You could see this place in the movie Land of Pharaohs, filmed by Howard King in 1956. And in 1964, the pyramid became a part of the restricted military zone, and excavations have been banned ever since. And most likely not by accident. The only person who seriously investigated the underground structure of this place was an experienced Italian archaeologist Alessandro Barsanti. Barsanti, by the way, discovered the tomb of Akhenaten. He began his excavations in 1904. They were repeatedly interrupted because of the complexity of the work, lack of funding, the First World War, and ended in 1917. Barsanti died before he could get to the truth, literally and figuratively. A brief review of what he discovered over the years. The descending corridor is 100 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 30 meters deep. At the end of the corridor is an underground chamber. Vertical red lines are found on two walls. The French Egyptologist Alexandre Marais, who visited the site after Barsanti's excavations, was amazed by the quality of construction. The walls, corridors and chambers are simply carved out of the limestone plateau. The walls are so smooth that they appear to have been carved out of the rock. It seems like a piece of butter cut with a thread. When Barsanti began to clear the corridor, he first came across sloppily piled limestone blocks. But underneath them was what looked like a paved floor of large limestone and granite blocks. 4 layers of blocks with a total height of 4.5 meters. In fact, this is what the lower layer of blocks looked like. Who and why created such a dense construction of dozens of stones at the bottom of the pit, and what was hidden under them? The largest block here weighed 43 tons, and the longest has a length of 4 meters. All the granite blocks were very carefully polished. Under the layer of large blocks at the bottom of the pit, Barsanti found a unique granite block polished like a mirror, in which there was a cut oval vat, 2 meters long and 1 meter deep. It was tightly closed on top with a granite lid with 4 lugs. The lid was covered with a layer of lime, underneath which was a layer of clay, sealing this vessel very tightly and hermetically. Barsanti himself wrote, "It seems that it was the block that the builders really wanted to hide deeper, with all the other stones." On the block adjacent to the western vat was found a royal cartouche, a text indicating the name of the ruler of Nefkara. Many believe this is the name of a mythical ancestor of Egypt's first rulers. Of course, Barsanti wasn't watching Hollywood horror movies and decided to open the mysterious granite vessel, which looked like a giant perfume jar. Quote, "All the precautions taken allowed me to hope that the contents would prove most valuable. But I was again deceived. When the inside of the container showed itself, I found it completely empty. I only noticed that the sides were covered with a black strip, 10 centimeters high. It was probably a very fine sediment of some liquid that had been poured into the vat and had evaporated over the years." Some of my companions have suggested that this tank was an unused sarcophagus, but I don't think so. The care with which it was protected proves that there was something in it, and the blackish patina indicates the nature of those contents. If it was empty at the time, it would not have been hidden under a huge mass of blocks. The blocks in the floor were tightly and logically connected, like some unrealistic jigsaw puzzle. Just take a look at this. Underneath the first layer was the next layer of blocks, and the whole thing went to a depth unknown to us. Barsanti spent years trying to pull out one by one these blocks, trying to solve this puzzle and get to the chambers that he thought were underneath the layer of rock. All in all, he pulled out 426 tons of stone. One day, after a heavy rain, the pit was flooded to a height of 3 meters. Near midnight, the water dropped sharply to about 1 meter. Barsanti realized that the water had gone into underground tunnel large enough to hold 380 cubic meters of water. Alexander had tried with all his might to reach these cavities during the last years of his activity, but he had never succeeded. Many people think it is a pyramid and have even found its base. But in fact, these perimeter fences were made by Barsanti himself in his time to keep the pit from being constantly filled with sand. So little is said about this place, but it's already told us so much. The stonework at the bottom of the pit was made so well and carefully for a reason. It seems to me that this pit was a huge reservoir for storing water, and the red lines served as a measure of its level. Barsanti himself said that the vat block reminded him of a cork. It is quite possible that the lower blocks and the blocks above them were stacked at different periods. The mention of Nefkara on the lower blocks points us at times more than 6,000 years ago. Researchers believe it was simply a burial chamber with a ritual purpose. But what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. In the separate video about the pyramids, which will come out on this channel in the future, I will talk about possible technological purpose of this shaft. To intrigue you, I want to say the Giza pyramids are nearby above grade for a reason. The entire mountain was carved to create this ancient temple that excites the minds of many people, and its dating and construction technology raises a lot of questions. Recently, one of my subscribers sent me a video showing an already existing technology of laser stone carving. Here is how it looks. Fiber laser machines have been around in industry for quite a while, but only in recent years compact portable versions started to appear. Nowadays, you can even buy a home laser machine for soft materials for around $300. However, for stone, you would need something much more powerful and expensive. And for so-called Kailasa temple, an even more powerful version would have been required. And it could have actually existed, if we simply stop thinking that it's the first time that humanity reached such a level of development. Kailasa temple was not created in the traditional way as we are used to when stones or bricks are stacked on each other. This whole building is made by cutting the mountain, removing basalt rock in order to give it the shape of a temple. A similar approach can be found only in a few ancient buildings around the world. Now, Kailasa is the largest ancient temple ever found on Earth built this way. Moreover, the exquisite form and delicacy of the work is simply striking. Historians are shocked by the amount of stone that had to be removed to build this temple. Archaeologists have confirmed that 400,000 tons of stone had to be removed for it to be built. They also claim that the construction took 18 years. With this data, some inquisitive minds calculated how many tons of stone had to be taken out every day to build this temple in 18 years. Provided that people did not rest at all and the construction went on continuously day and night, it was that they had to remove 22,222 tons of stone a year, 60 tons a day, 5 tons of stone per hour. We're not taking into account the time spent on carving fancy bas-reliefs and planning all these works. It's unclear why they did need to spend so much time and effort building a temple. Look at the view from above. This temple has a highly symmetrical design, which is not so often inherent in such ancient buildings. I now mean not the evenness of the walls and the quality of the polishing, but the overall composition of the construction. Looking from above, only this part doesn't fit in a perfectly symmetrical ensemble. I can't imagine how did they carve this all in one piece. For example, it takes a very long time to create one such pillar, and this is provided that it is made of separate stones that are sanded after putting one over the other. And here the pillar was created by removing all the rock around it. But what's more exciting is how the ancient architects were able to create a construction plan that would take all of this into account and then made it all so precisely. The temple has bridges that connect buildings, sewage and rainwater collection systems, large balconies and complex stairs, and it was all planned before they started carving it out of the rock. For some reason, I can think of an analogy with 3D printing and model design in 3D. These technologies are already available to us, but we're doing this out of plastic, with small details by applying heated plastic layer by layer. And here the logic is a bit similar, only layer after layer, a huge mountain removed. Perhaps they also melted it before this. We can imagine a huge 3D printer vacuum cleaner that absorbs the rocks. But when I learned about laser stone carving, everything became even more obvious, and this could even explain the famous local legend that the temple was carved in a single night, which had seemed like complete nonsense to me. The rock from which Kailasa was carved is basalt tuff, which, however, has almost the same hardness as basalt on the Mohs scale, although it is slightly easier to work with due to its porosity. For comparison, limestone, which the Egyptian pyramids are made of, is almost twice as soft. There is information and historical records that in the late 17th century, the Muslim king Aurangzeb gathered 1,000 men and ordered them to destroy the temple. 1,000 people worked for 3 years, and all they could do was rip off elephants' noses, damaged faces of statues, and plaster. Eventually, after 3 years of unsuccessful attempts to wipe the temple from the face of the earth, Aurangzeb abandoned the idea. And as we know, to destroy is easier than to create. And even if it was basalt tuff, the question remains: who could have created such a large-scale structure and why use such a strange technology of construction? Besides, how did they know that basalt tuff runs to such a depth? Did they conduct exploration by drilling? Let's imagine that they carved the rock for 5 years, and then it turned out that at a 7-meter depth some kind of super hard rock lies, or vice versa, clay. Let's turn to open sources. The temple dates from about the 8th century AD, dated according to a copper plate with fragmented text found in Gujarat state. It's written on a plate: it was commanded to build a miraculous temple on a hill in Alapur, at the side of which the best of the immortals, moving on the heavenly chariots, were amazed with its beauty. The architect who built the temple was suddenly amazed. How did I build it? The inscription is dated to 812 AD, but it only confirms that the temple already existed in 812. There is no evidence that it was built at this time. Many archaeologists believe that the Temple of Kailasa is the oldest among the temple complexes of the Ellora caves. Supposedly, it was built centuries before people began to build the rest of the temples here. By the way, there are 34 cave temples here. The famous Helena Blavatsky and archaeologist Graham Hancock defended the theory that the given building was created much earlier by representatives of another civilization. Near the Ellora caves, there are similar ancient structures that are underwater, and therefore they were built at a time when the ocean level was 100 meters lower. That is, before the Ice Age. Let's sum up. The ancient builders pulled out about 400,000 tons of stone to build an enormous complex with bridges, balconies, sewers and other things in one piece from the mountain. And it was definitely done earlier than in the 8th century AD. People in the 17th century did not manage to destroy this temple. People in the 21st century are still struggling to guess and cannot understand the true logic of the builders and recreate something similar. Was this temple built using primitive technologies, or was technology from highly developed civilization used here? It would be very easy to test this if someone would now try to carve a small temple in those places in a similar way, but no one has done it yet. This would certainly give the answer to a lot of questions, although perhaps reduce the tourist attractiveness of this place. Write in the comments which position do you hold, and have you seen Kailasa temple with your own eyes? Subscribe and see you at Ancient Builders channel.